We have come to know it fondly as the Square, a simple city block of buildings, of businesses. The road made first of dirt, then of bricks, now of pavement. Old-fashioned architecture mixed with new-fashioned storefronts. And maybe, just maybe, you can still smell the popcorn, or taste the pizza, or hear mufflers on the cars scooping the loop, or even see that first Western playing up on the big screen. It's an area of Ripon that is labeled as the 100 block, but it is really so much more to so many more than just a simple square. It is the memories we have now about the moments we lived back then. These are the stories of the Square.
I think that was the hub of Ripon because of the scale. It was the largest section of downtown. And it also had, of course, the movie theater, which was the major entertainment venue in Ripon. Probably still is.
But even long before Tim Like and his family came to Ripon, the Square was a place of necessity for the people of Ripon. More than a century earlier, in the early 1850s, the first building on Ripon Square, a hardware store, was erected. Next came a couple of grocery stores and a jewelry store. There was also the addition of a small restaurant where locals could dine. By 1875, a drugstore and the First National Bank opened their doors. The businesses brought more people to town, and as Ripon became more popular and found more publicity, along came the railroad line, and hotels, most notably the Grandview Hotel. By the early 1900s, business was booming, and Ripon's growth continued on a steady pace for the next couple of decades. Maury Morgan was born in 1921 and lived on a farm outside of Ripon.
As a young boy, I remembered that we came into Ripon with horses and sleigh. In about 1932, roads were blocked for snow, that the roads were shut for 6 weeks. We come to Ripon to get groceries with the horses and sleigh, my dad and I. My dad had to go to the grocery stores on the square. We tied our horses out in the back of the horse alley, they called it. And then we walked up to the stores on the square.
But those times brought more than just business to the Square. The section was also becoming a center for entertainment, hosting everything from circuses to 4th of July celebrations. The Square was quickly becoming the place to be in downtown Ripon. One of the signature buildings on the Square was built in the first half of the 1930s. And on November 1st, 1935, Ben Marcus opened the first Marcus Cinema Theater right on the Square in downtown Ripon. Of course, the building still remains today and has been the site for endless memories for many generations through the years. Nancy Kuhn has deep Ripon roots and actually lived on the Square above Sven's Barbershop. She recalls her early years of going to the campus theater.
And I do remember going to the campus theater way back then as a kid and I always knew that it was the first Marcus Theater because Ben Marcus lived in the hotel and my husband's family owned the hotel. And so my husband got a roll, every year he got a roll of tickets for his birthday from Ben Marcus.
Campus theater, when I first came to Ripon, that was a big thing. Where I lived before, there wasn't a theater. I was 10 years old, and we went to just about every movie that changed. The movies changed 3, sometimes 4 times a week, and we always went, especially on Friday nights when there was a double feature. Usually 2 cowboy movies. Gene Autry and Roy Rogers were the main characters at that time that we liked to see.
When I was 10, 12 years old, we'd almost every Saturday afternoon we were heading to
to the matinee, normally a Western, but I don't remember what they were. Gene Autry, Hopalong Cassidy, Roy Rogers, pretty much that.
I do remember going to Gone with the Wind there. That's where I saw that the first time. And we didn't go to the movies a lot as kids, but we would come in once in a while. We would go, especially if I stayed in town.
And how much did it cost to go to the movies back then?
I remember 12 cents. 12 cents and 10 cents for a box of popcorn, and most of the other things were 5 cents a box of jujubes. That's what we call them at that time. I don't think they make them anymore. And any type of candy was a nickel.
Because we used to go to the theater for probably 50 cents instead of $8 now and $5 for a little box of popcorn.
Both Joyce Rudolph and Norm Raske moved to Ripon in the 1940s. Dave Florek was born in Ripon in 1942 and has stayed here ever since. Some of his best campus memories included Saturday matinees.
That was pretty much a out-of-house babysitting thing for Ma and Pa. They could send you down there for an afternoon and see the matinee and be out of their hair for a little while, I think. Man, I remember walking out of there in the afternoon, and you're in that dark theater, and you'd walk outside. You couldn't see nothing.
You know, great matinees at the campus theater, and you'd go in and it would be, the sun would be shining. It'd be 1 p.m. and it'd be sun would be overhead, and then you come out and it's kind of like the day was over. I mean, the sun was, you know, at about 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, a little lower in the sky. And you felt like, hey, what did I just do? But you had a wonderful time at the campus. We lived on Scott Street, about 3 blocks from, well, maybe 4 blocks from the movie theater. But we'd walk down Saturday afternoons. We typically had, I think we got a roll of tickets. And so you'd pull the ticket for that particular matinee. And of course, they would start with maybe 3 Warner Brothers cartoons, which were fun to see, really big and really colorful. And they were, for some reason, always funnier at the campus than they were at home on TV.
I remember taking my children to Dumbo, which was on a re-release already then.
And we would get candy, sometimes at the theater, but sometimes it was a little expensive at the theater, those Charm Suckers and the Junior Mints and Chuckles jellied candies. So we might stop at Drive-In Liquor on the way and pick up a little cheaper candy and then bring it into the campus.
And I can remember going to the popcorn stand down on the end of the square, getting their popcorn because it was only a nickel. And we'd sneak that into the theater because we didn't want to pay a dime for a box of popcorn.
The popcorn stand to which Rudolph is referring remains fresh in the minds of many Ripponites. Richard and Helen Cerny have lived in Ripon for more than 40 years.
We've always
had
had
popcorn on the corner.
And we had, there was right on the corner by where there was a sub shop, and it was
Where the stairs go up to
where
the
the stairs
door.
go down. They used to always have a popcorn wagon there, and that on Friday night was the busiest place there ever was.
The popcorn stand was just in the beginning of the other block of Watson Street, at the top of the square.
The only one I can think of the popcorn stand was at by the barber shop, right around the corner there. That's the only one that I can think of that was there for a long time. I do not know who ran it, but that's I enjoyed. Hugo Kuss, his name was, had a popcorn stand there. I was never much into popcorn, but I remember the stand being there.
That was a wonderful place, that popcorn stand. That popcorn was inexpensive. You could get a bag, or if you were really having a good night, you could spring for a box, I think for $0.25. There were candy bars there, and then the gentleman who ran it was just fun to be with. But that Saturday nights, we'd walk down Scott Street and walk down to the popcorn stand and then visit with folks.
Heading downtown to the square on Friday and Saturday nights was what many folks did back in the day. And there were plenty of things to do, from dancing to shopping to simply enjoying the company of others.
They used to periodically have a dance on Friday night, and all the farmers would come into town and they'd have a dance on the square in front of where the old city hall had been, which was in front of the National Forensic League, right in there. They'd block it off and have a dance. And that's when I was I don't know, 10 or 12 years old. As I say, the farmers would come in and they were, they had worked hard all week, and the store stayed open later on Friday night. And they came, and I don't know, it just, there was music there instead of up at the, I'm not quite, if it was sort of dance music, sort of country music. That's what I remember the most.
I guess one of my favorite memories of the square is on Friday nights. On Friday nights, many of the rural people came to Ripon, and they parked along the square and all the way around Watson Street. And most of them sat in their cars or eating popcorn. And there were many people walking on the sidewalks at that time because the stores weren't open on Sunday. So on Friday night, people came into town to do their shopping. And I guess men would sit in the car, the women went into the stores, and people walking up and down the sidewalk would stop and talk to the people. It was such a friendly place. Everyone said hello, or they stopped, oh, how are you tonight, and so forth. I guess that's one of my best memories. I think of that often.
Saturday night, we'd come downtown, and we could do our shopping.
Friday nights were BIG, good shopping. The farmers came to town on Friday night. At one time it seemed that they came on Saturday night also, but I remember Friday nights were big. Gear yourself up for the heavy traffic.
Going downtown for Moonlight Madness. During the summer, downtown Ripon would have a promotion, I'm guessing maybe in August, but it was during the summer, called Moonlight Madness, and Dad would put us all in Mom and Dad would put us in our pajamas, we'd be in the back of the station wagon, and they'd go downtown and shop because there were deals later in the evening.
Even today, Ripon Square remains the location for many festivals and celebrations, highlighted by Septemberfest and Dickens of a Christmas. Another event on the square that was steeped in tradition was Maxwell Street Days.
It was just one day, and it was on a Friday, and everybody downtown had their store outside. And this was even through the years, all the churches would have stands, all the businesses, the service clubs, like the Kiwanis or Lions would have brought stands. At 12 o'clock, we'd have big barrels of corn come in from the fields. And I don't know, was it free or pretty close to free? There was very little that it would cost, and we could they'd take the corn and shuck it part way and then bury it in butter.
My husband was the secretary of the Chamber of the Chamber of Commerce, and so our job was, when we still did Maxwell Street Days the old way, they would block off everything, have all these things, and then we'd have corn that we handed out to people free. And that was in the 70s, 74. And I said it was really a messy job. People were really grabby about their corn. They thought this was free corn, we should have it, should be wonderful. But the Boy Scouts would do this, would bag up the corn, and then we'd give it out right there on the square in front of the bank.
The event that I recall most vividly certainly would be Maxwell Street Days. And saving our money, and maybe Mom would give us an extra $1 or $2, and we'd come downtown and be very careful about how we were going to spend that money. but you'd look over everything. And then you'd maybe blow a little bit of it on a game that maybe the Jaycees were running. You'd try to flip those rings on the bottles, or we'd throw a ping pong ball and get ourselves a goldfish and then bring them home, and they'd die about 6 hours later. But Maxwell Street Days was a real treat, and we just couldn't wait to wake up and get down to Maxwell Street Days.
Alice Euchre recalls another celebration that took place right down on the square.
There was a fall festival at one time, and yes, everybody decorated their truck and car. There was a big parade, and yes, and there was dancing. My cousin Lester Keene was an accordion player, and he played kind of in the middle of town here.
And Jean Woolley, who moved with her family to Ripon in August of 1969, remembers a big event that took place just a few years after they arrived.
I think the one that I remember the most was the 200-year celebration of the Declaration of Independence. That was a huge 4th of July parade celebrating 1976 as a 200-year American celebration.
There was another anniversary celebration that took place down on the square, this to honor Ripon's 100th birthday. But as Dave Florek explains, this celebration didn't necessarily result in a good time or a happy memory.
I do remember when I was a kid, I think it was a centennial celebration in Ripon, down on the square. It wasn't really a good memory because I rode what they call a hammer. I went round and round, and not only did it go around, but it turned. I was really ready to get off of there. I was not a happy camper when I finally hit the ground, feet hit the ground, and a pretty sick little boy on the way home.
Less than a decade earlier, the face of the square would be changed forever as Ripon was hit with its worst disaster. The Grand View Hotel was located on the north end of the square where the Ripon City Building sits today. The hotel was Ripon's signature building. Then, on a cold, cold winter night, February 1st, 1949, tragedy struck.
The reason we woke up was we heard Millie Rudine, which was the only reason that probably a lot of people was saved, because she was running down the hall screaming, "Fire, fire, please get out." And of course we didn't know what she was yelling because it was after midnight, and we thought maybe somebody was trying to get after her. So Mac says, "Well, I think we better check and see if Millie's okay." And he opened the door and the smoke just rolled in. He shut the door and he says, "Get dressed quick, we're out of here, the place is on fire." As soon as we got some clothes on so we wouldn't freeze to death on the outside, we opened the door, and when we went down the stairs to go out, the railing on the stair was on flames. So we just ran as close as we could to the wall and got out. Right across the street, my husband says, "I think I better get the car out from the back," which was a parking lot, so that the fire engine could come back there if they needed to. And he just ran around the back and got the car out of the parking space and came back down Watson Street, and we both stood there quite a while watching the fire. I don't think we ever thought we'd get back in, but we watched it anyway.
North of Ripon on a farm 6 miles north. But I one of the kids woke up. It must have been between 2 and 3, and I was up, and our bay window was to the south, and I could see there was an awful fire in Ripon. The sky was red, and you could almost see flames, but I had no idea what it was.
Was horribly, woefully underinsured. We knew its construction. That was not a brick building. It was a frame building with a brick skin. And it was old, it was dry, and we often said not if the hotel burns, but when.
They had to use hand ladders, and when I started with the fire department in '62, they still talked about that fire because there was a lot of firemen at that time that had to fight that fire, and they practiced extensively on that particular building. And of course, then when it happens, it's nothing, you cannot predict what that fire was going to do. But I know they tried their darndest, and they had some good community help.
It was really cold, really, really cold. It was way below zero, if I remember right. And Al Brown, and I'm sure everybody that's familiar with Ripon, came down and opened up the restaurant and had got coffee for us. And he kept it open till the whole morning after that. So we were there for probably till around 4:30. From there on, we went back to Indiana to get some things to wear. The topography and the height of that building, even if you put a ladder, you know, Pacific Street slopes down, and that building was just huge, you know, and as a 15-year-old, that was the biggest building in town, and the ladders did not reach. And of course, that was the only way they had, because the rooms were in the back of the hotel, and that's where your patrons were. And again, the wind from the north, it must just been a terrible, terrible night to fight that fire.
and by morning the Grandview was gone, and 6 people had perished.
It was about 6:30 that morning that I got up, or I heard the phone ring. My dad got up and answered the phone, and it was his sister calling from Chicago. And she said, George, what's going on in Ripon? WGN reports that the Grandview Hotel burnt to the ground, and there's a possibility of 5 to 7 fatalities.
I lived up at 649 Lincoln Street at the time, and I didn't know there was a fire. I used to walk down to the office morning, so I took off for the office in the neighborhood of 7:45 or so. And as I came down Watson Street, I looked up ahead, and where there should be the hotel, there was nothing but a cloud of steam and smoke.
When I heard it, I started to cry because that was my home and I liked it there. I mean, and the one reason that I left was when I was going steady, and when the fireman told us that there was no ladder that would reach up to our rooms where we were, my boyfriend said, "You're going to get out of there."
And I guess I'll never forget coming over the top of Watson Street Hill and seeing the grand view for my 15 years of my early life, and there was nothing there that morning. And of course, as we got closer to downtown, the reality set in.
I remember I did not see it happen, but I was home in bed, and a neighbor down the road from me came in by my house and by my bedroom, and they hollered to me, there's a fire at the hotel. To me, this was a building that was, I would say, a remnant of the city of Ripon. It was always been there, and that is a long memory before my time.
Speaking of the Grandview fire, Grandview Hotel fire, I went down there, watched it for a while, then I went home. Those that got out of there went to the south, down where the point comes out. I think it's a forensic, and they put up in there at the time the fire was going on.
At the time of the fire, my grandfather was very concerned because the mill was right behind the city hall, right behind the hotel, and if the wind had changed.
As far as Grandview went, I remember it being there. I remember that when the fire was there, and after the fire, I had an uncle that had just come back from World War II, and he helped rescue some of the bodies and such out of it.
The city and the square would never be the same again. The north end of the square has not been the only noticeable change that Ripponites have seen over the years. One of the most prominent differences through the decades has simply been how people parked on the square. Early on, the entire square was wide open, and parking your vehicle, be it a horse, a buggy, or a car, was rather random.
I remember way back at that time that the square was brick, right straight across, no green peninsula, and parallel parking. In looking back at the older pictures before my time, it seemed that, yeah, the horse and buggy crew or gang gathered there and chatted, or maybe went and had a short foamy something or other in one of the taverns on the square.
It was back like in the horse and buggy days. You just parked wherever you could find a space. You know, leave enough room to drive past, and that was it. Yeah, it was. You parked in the middle at angles both sides, and you went around the square. When you scooped the loop, you could park on either side, and you parked in there both ways.
It was squared up to the walk, facing the square on the walk. That's the way the cars parked. In fact, I do have some pictures, old pictures, that shows when the old cars parked into the sides of the sidewalk.
I remember the square when you could just, there was nothing in the middle and you could just park your cars anywhere, and I think they were even cobblestone then at that point at the square. I remember when we didn't have those crazy bump outs that we have now. I mean, it was just straight.
The cobblestone Nancy Kuhn remembers was made out of red brick.
I do remember something, I don't know if anyone else mentioned it, are the bricks that were, the entire Watson Street and square was made of brick. And I've seen pictures of it all lit up, and it was beautiful.
That was all redone with the red bricks, the whole street. And of course, they eliminated them a number of years back.
And they had to do sewer work. So underneath the asphalt were these fantastic bricks, because the whole square had all been brick before, and they were big road bricks. And they tore all those up and they put them out at the dump. And you could go out and buy them for 10 cents a piece.
And some of those brilliant red bricks from years gone by can still be found at various places throughout the city of Ripon.
There's a lot of red bricks, driveways and sidewalks around town if you do any walking or anything.
My son-in-law has a complete patio and sidewalk made out of those bricks.
And we still have 11 of these bricks at our house. And the whole Scammahorn sidewalk at their house is made out of those bricks.
In fact, Jean's husband Bill had hands-on experience with many of those old red bricks.
I can also remember my husband, who was in the Rotary Club, going down and helping to put the bricks in that are on the square now, because those bricks came from that street that they dug up. So Rotary Square was created out of those street bricks.
Probably the most time-honored tradition related to Ripon Square is an activity that nearly every person who has lived in the city has participated in, at least in some form or another. Literally everyone has a story about scooping the loop.
I guess my high school days are my biggest memories of the square. And of course, the big thing you probably heard from others is scooping the loop. We did that as kids all the time. If you had a boyfriend, you got in a car, and on a weekday evening, you scooped the loop. You went around the square, and you went up around where Walgreens is now. That was the Ripon Knitting Works. You turned around, made a U-turn up there, and came back down around the square again and did it again.
If an officer came along shaking his shillelagh, billy club, call it what you want at that time, you quick headed out to Barlow Park. And then you slowly came down the side streets and came back and loop-de-loop some more until you got another shake on it, and it was about time to go home by that time.
When you could scoop the loop, you know, you could go around and the girls would sit on the cars and the boys would sit and go around and toot to the girls. So it was a big deal. They all sat there, and then they outlawed that. I don't remember what year they outlawed scooping the loop. And everybody who got married in Ripon would scoop the loop. You know, they'd go down and toot their horns after they got married and then go off to their receptions. But that was a big deal. That was a big social, event was to be doing that.
And some people took their scooping the loop very seriously.
Okay, that gets very deep. It goes into religion. Okay. And I was brought up evangelical, and you didn't mix with the world. So, but you did sneak down and see who's scooping the loop and who's picking up who.
You were either a scooper, meaning you'd drive the car around and you'd be seen, or you'd be a scoopee, meaning you'd probably be seen standing there while others are scooping. And I never had my own car, so as I got older, I'd occasionally hook up with some guys who had a car, but for the most part, we'd stand around. The high school guys would often stand around in front of Big Al's Tap on the 200 block with their leather jackets. So one time I was in a car that scooped the loop, and we borrowed a fire extinguisher from Ripon College, from the Union, and we got the high school guys, the big jocks in their leather jackets standing out in front of Big Al's Tap. We got them right below the belt buckle with our fire extinguisher. So they had to either go home or stand there with wet bottoms. I don't know what they did. We didn't stick around to see.
I was warned about it, and you don't ride with them wild guys, but we did stand on a street corner and watch them go round and round until the cops, the officers, put a stop to it after a while.
And also, a lot of the guys like to have loud mufflers, and so when they came around that square, they'd go broom, broom, and that made a lot of noise, and kids on the street liked that.
Dave Florek remembers scooping the loop in a less traditional way.
Yeah. Better question is if I ever got off the loop. Put a lot of before I was 16, before I got my driver's license, I had an old black bicycle, and I would scoop the loop on that all day long, practically.
My other scoop the loop story is my brother Andy would, because he'd scoop the loop with some buddies, but his claim to fame was that he could, well, let me back up. There was a sound-activated burglar alarm at Gray's Rexall, which is just off the loop. It was on the 200 block, but it had this sound-activated burglar alarm so that if you stood in front of the window and you clapped your hands, the alarm would go off for maybe 10 seconds. A light would go on and you'd hear a buzzer. My brother's claim to fame is that he could drive past Gray's Rexall on the passenger side of the driver's, the front seat, open the window, and he could belch from the window, and he could set the burglar alarm off. such as growing up in Ripon in the 1960s?
I remember scooping a loop. I had an old 55 Ford was my first car, and it had a little lever on the floor that you push to activate the windshield washers. Well, one side, the passenger side, got plugged up, and the other one would shoot way off over. So I'd be going one way, and my buddies would be coming the other, and I'd get real close to the center line and hit that thing, and they didn't take long. They came by with all their squirt guns and water balloons and everything else. And it was not a good idea at the time.
There were some people, however, who didn't scoop the loop.
We didn't do much of that because we couldn't afford the gas. Because gas was 3 gallons for $1, so you didn't waste any. We used to come to town and we'd shut it off and walk the streets. We didn't do no scoop the looping.
I never had a car while I was in high school, so I personally didn't scoop the loop, but I know a lot of kids that did. And I know a lot of them that used to race down Watson Street.
Jean Woolley explains her family's rather unique approach to scooping the loop.
I never scooped the loop, but I can tell you this about scooping the loop. We drove a conversion van. And before that, we drove a Volare wagon with 3 on the floor. And our kids would do anything not to have to scoop the loop in those vehicles because they were absolutely so not cool that they would hitch rides with anybody that had something that was even the slightest bit more appropriate for loop scooping than what we owned.
Of course, over a period of more than a century, the buildings on the square have undergone numerous changes. Most of the changes have been to businesses on the 100 block. But the names of the businesses have not been the only thing to change. The way people shopped and the reasons people shopped changed as well.
We did business to satisfy our needs, mostly groceries and clothes. Shoe stores downtown, clothing stores, dress stores for the ladies. Pretty much all your necessities were there. Of course, at that time, the time I'm thinking about anyway, there was no Kmart or Walmart, any of those big chains except maybe a Sears. And if you needed something special, you always had the catalog.
I think the thing that's most noticeable to me as I compare the early 70s and right now is that when we first moved here, just about everything that you needed came from downtown. There was no west side. Trips to Oshkosh and Fond du Lac were really rare. And what we needed was available downtown, and it was primarily focused on meeting basic needs. There were grocery stores, drugstore, the hardware stores, the banks, the dentist office upstairs from the bank. All of those things were things that you needed as everyday kinds of basic things.
The longest running business with the same name is Sven's Barbershop, located at 110 Watson Street.
We would come in and get our haircuts. I remember that Sven was the one that cut my son's first haircut because we lived up there, so Peter got his haircut free when he was a year old.
Sven's Barbershop, which is still there. I remembered Mr. Sven, my father, always got his hair cut there. He could cut head of men's hair like in 5 minutes. He was very fast. And so the men liked to go there. In fact, he probably was the busiest barber in town at that time.
Some of those things are still downtown, but the primary focus now is on enhancement. Things that make life better, but not necessarily things that are basic needs.
So, how does Jean Woolley compare the two different shopping styles?
You know how nostalgia goes. You always think the good old days were good. But I I can't say that I like or dislike the change. I just realize that it is what it is. But I can tell you, I remember the old shops more than I remember the ones that come and go now. No offense to the ones that are down there now, but if you're getting what you need as opposed to what you might want, you're going to remember because you go there often.
Well, of course, I guess I would have to think it was better in the past. It was a slower, much better time, I think. For instance, we as kids could, at night, could roller skate up and down on the sidewalks on Watson Street. We could go up to the college and roller skate. You know, our parents didn't have to worry about anything. We just went outside, played, came in before it got dark, and that's the way we lived. Much simpler time, and I enjoyed it. I'm always disappointed that my family, my children and grandchildren, did not live in those times.
Ah, yes, the good old days. Some say they are gone forever. But for those familiar with the not-so-simple 100 block in downtown Ripon, the memories made there will never go away, and neither will their stories of the square.